Every week at Great Lakes Church, we like to start the same way, and that is we like to welcome everybody, like to welcome our campuses. And I think this is always a great reminder that our church is not about a specific group of people at a specific service time on a specific day at a specific location. God has us in different places for different reasons, and we're able to impact wherever we live and wherever we're at because He has us there. And so I just am grateful for the influence and impact God's given us through the different venues. And so for those of you at our Kenosha campus, we welcome you. Racine campus, we welcome you. For those of you who watch online, you listen online, you engage with us week after week, we're grateful to have you part of our faith community. And for those in the room with me, we love you and welcome all of you. All right, so today is week 2 of a teaching series that we're calling #blessed. Right? In our culture, whenever we use this word blessed, it's typically synonymous with words like happiness or success or comfort. We feel blessed when our life is at a point where we're becoming more and more self-sufficient and more independent. And so if we were to do a poll and we were to say, hey, who wants to be blessed? Every hand's going to go up. We want God's blessing on our life. We want God's blessing on our family, our career. We just want God's blessing in every arena of everything we do. And the good news is, there's nothing wrong with that. God loves to bless. It's actually part of who He is. It's core to the character of God. And when we talk about blessing, to bless someone means to project good into their life. That's what it means to bless them. It means to add value to them. It's this life-giving power of sorts. And the way we bless people really happens in one of two ways. Either A, we remove a burden from them or help carry a burden for them, or B, we give them a gift. So we remove a burden from them or we give them a gift. To remove a burden might simply be, hey, I see it's a burden for you to pick up your kids every day and rearrange your schedule, so I'll start doing that for you. I know in this season of your life, it's a burden to do all the cooking. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one day a week and help you with that because of the season you're in. Right? And then it's to give a gift of encouragement. Maybe it's just a note of encouragement. Maybe it's donating blood. Maybe it's giving a financial gift to someone. But that's what it means to bless people. And the good news for all of us is that God loves to bless. So Moses was the leader of the Israelites for 40 years. And as he's getting towards the end of his life and he realizes, hey, my time is winding down, he calls all of the Israelites together. And as many as could hear him or within ear range of him, he speaks very candidly to them about the blessings of God. Here's what Moses says to them. He says, you will experience all these blessings if you obey the Lord your God. Your towns and your fields will be blessed. Your children and your crops will be blessed. The offspring of your herds and flocks will be blessed. He says, your fruit baskets and breadboards will be blessed. Wherever you go and whatever you do, you will be blessed. So Moses says to the Israelites, hey, live in obedience to God, and He is going to bless you. Now, if you don't live in obedience, there's consequences, but that's not God's desire. God's desire is to bless you. And of course, the opposite of blessing is cursing. Yeah, when we talk about cursing, we're not talking about, some Harry Potter movie where someone's casting spells on someone. That's not cursing. To curse someone means to do or say something that brings death. Death to someone's confidence, death to their self-esteem, death to a relationship, death to someone's reputation. And so to curse someone is to retaliate. It's to be cruel and mean-spirited. It's to treat someone with disrespect. And we see this happen all the time in the world that we live in. There's a police department about an hour away from Atlanta, Georgia, and they decided to capitalize on this evil side that all of us have and don't want to admit it's there, right? And the way they capitalized on it is they posted something to their Facebook page at the beginning of this month. They said, yesterday kicked off the month of celebrating the love in your life, and we don't want you to forget those exes that did you wrong either. So they said, hey, do you have an ex that you know has an outstanding warrant, someone who maybe has drugs in their car? They said, call us with their location. We'll take care of the rest. And I love it. They said this Valentine's Day month-long special starts off with a set of limited edition platinum bracelets free transportation with a chauffeur, a one-night minimum stay in a luxurious 5-star accommodations, and professional glamour shots that will be posted online for all to enjoy. This special is capped off with a special Valentine's dinner. And then they said, of course, operators are going to be standing by. And I love this because they posted this picture with their post, right? Now, obviously, tongue-in-cheek post, but there's something in all of us that loves the idea of retaliation and hurting the people who have hurt us. That's the world we live in. It's a world that's filled with way more blessing or way more cursing than blessing. If you go to liar.com right now, it redirects to the Wikipedia page of Justin Trudeau, who is the Prime Minister of Canada. Now, the rumor behind this is that Elon Musk, who hates Trudeau, he bought the website and then he redirected it to Justin's page. Now, even if it wasn't Elon Musk who did this, whoever did, it's savage, right? That's not blessing someone, but God loves to bless. And it's not always easy to see his blessings. Often, if we're going to see and recognize and embrace the blessings, we have to slow down to look for them. And there's several places in the scriptures where we see people doing this. They just pause their life. King David used to do this on a regular basis. And we would look at King David and say, man, you're the king. You're obviously blessed. But man, King David had lots of difficulty in his life, lots of challenges. There were seasons that were incredibly overwhelming for him. And so King David knew that it was super important for him to just pause from time to time and reflect on the blessings in his life. And on one of the many, many occasions where he just pauses and reflects, he writes these words in his journal. He says, I will praise you, Lord, with all my heart. I will tell of all the marvelous things you have done. I will be filled with joy because of you. I will sing praises to your name, O Most High. Now, he's not saying this because every day was picture perfect. It wasn't. But he's saying, man, as I discipline myself and I look for the blessings, I'm realizing there's a lot of blessings in my life. In fact, the book of Psalms, many of the different writings in that book are King David reflecting on his blessings. There's an occasion where King David is looking back at his life and he's remembering how his life has unfolded and how things used to look for him. He remembers as a teenager that his job was being a shepherd and overseeing flocks of sheep. But now as he's reflecting, he is the king of Israel. He's got a couple million people under his leadership. And so as he reflects on this, it just leads him to a place of gratitude. And he begins to pray a prayer, and he starts the prayer with a question. Here's the question he prays. His prayer starts with, who am I, O sovereign Lord? And what is my family that you have brought me this far? Have you ever stopped to consider the blessings in your life and how far God has brought you in different arenas? See, God's blessed us all in different ways, but let's be honest, the blessings become white noise. Blessings can be in front of us and we don't even recognize them. If you're able to have a day off or enjoy a vacation once, twice, 3 times a year, you have been blessed with the gift of rest. Not everybody in the world has that. If you have a family where everyone is alive and living under the same roof, regardless of how functional or dysfunctional you may feel, that's a blessing. If you have food in your fridge, if you're able to pay the bills each month, that is the blessing of provision. If you have an education, it's the blessing of knowledge. If you have children, they are a blessing most of the time, right? If you have close friends, and those friends bring strength and hope and encouragement to you, that's a blessing. If you're healthy, or if you're relatively healthy, that's a blessing. If you have a place to live, you've been blessed with shelter. Right? We live in a country where there's lots of freedom. That is the blessing. It's a blessing of opportunity. If you have a job that you enjoy, it's a blessing. The list goes on and on and on and on. And it's so easy to forget our blessings. For about a decade, Great Lakes Church was just a dream in my heart. Nothing more. I'd think about it, dream about it, ended up getting a website address before the church was launched. And today we're 13 years old. We have 2 facilities. We own property. We've got a great staff, a growing community of people online and in person who are committed to loving and serving people here, near, and far. And I got to tell you, there's a whole lot of days I forget those things. There's a whole lot of days I get restless. There's a whole lot of days where I just become overwhelmed with the stress. I become frustrated because I have this vision of where I want to be. And then when we're not there yet, it just eats away at me. But when I stop and I think about how God has blessed this church, it is sobering. And like King David, it's like, who am I? Oh, sovereign Lord, what is my family that you have brought me, that you have brought us, that you have brought our church this far? Right? When I look at who I was at 20 years old and where I am today, I mean, it just feels like there's unlimited blessings in so many arenas of life. I'm married, I have children, I've got a home, right? I've got a private jet that I fly around the country. No. Those of you online that don't know, no, that's not true, right? But man, I just feel so blessed. And I'm telling you, not only is my life blessed, I promise you, your life is blessed as well. But it doesn't always feel like that, specifically if we're in a season of need or pain or ongoing challenges. But even those things can lead to blessing. We talked a little bit about this last week, right? Our greatest needs can lead to our greatest blessings. When our needs and our pains and our hurts finally get us to the point where we open our hearts, we let others in that moment, we experience the blessing that other people can be in our life, the wisdom they can share, the hope that they can bring, the value that they can add. King David of Israel, before he was king, he experienced this reality with one of his friends. All right, so David had an incredibly close friend by the name of Jonathan. And early on in their friendship, David was in a scary season. It was in a difficult season because there were people who hated him. They were jealous of him. They were tracking him down. They wanted to kill him, right? They got Dog the Bounty Hunter on his trail. And so what ends up happening is David becomes vulnerable, and he opens up to Jonathan. He says, man, I'm scared. He goes, people are wanting to kill me. And Jonathan looks at him and says, Dave, you're dramatic. Nobody's trying to kill you. Right? This is in your head. And David said, no, it's not. And so Jonathan says, okay, I'm going to look into this. I'm going to see if there's anything true about what you're saying. And sure enough, he comes back and he says, man, there is truth to what you're saying, David. And so Jonathan puts his own life on the line and decides that he's going to help David escape and make sure he's in a safe place. And so in that season, Jonathan was an incredible blessing to David. Well, about 4 decades later, Jonathan dies. And by the time he dies, David is king of Israel. David is in a position of power and influence. And when David learns about his buddy Jonathan's death, he's mourning and he starts to remember how Jonathan had been a blessing to him decades earlier in a very difficult season of his life. And so he makes the decision that he wants to honor his friendship with Jonathan, and he wants to honor the life of Jonathan by blessing a member of Jonathan's family. And so the person he decides to bless is one of Jonathan's sons, a guy by the name of Mephibosheth. Now, I don't care what your name is. Your name ain't as bad as Mephibosheth. Right? There's not a lot you could do with that name. Right? Katie, Bobady, Banana, Fana, Fofani. You can't do that with Mephibosheth. Or you can do it, Dave. You can do it with, Tom. You can't do it with Mephibosheth. But here's what you need to know about Mephibosheth. When he was just a child, someone's watching him, taking care of him. They're running with him, and they fall and they drop him, and he breaks his feet. This is a time period that they don't have a bunch of doctors who can reset your feet. And so Mephibosheth, 3,000 years ago, is in this position where he's unable to walk properly. And that was his life. Now, it's hard to imagine this, but in this culture 3,000 years ago, if something was wrong with you physically, it was just assumed, well, the god, they're upset with you. They're punishing you. There's so much stigma and shame. And so Mephibosheth lives his life feeling rejected. And yet his father, and yet this moment comes where his father passes away, and David decides, I'm going to honor one of Jonathan's sons. And so King David sends for Mephibosheth, and when Mephibosheth shows up, he's afraid, he's insecure, he has no clue why he's being called in to the king's palace. Here's what we read. Don't be afraid, David said. I intend to show kindness to you. I will give you all the property that once belonged to your grandfather, and you will eat here with me at the king's table. He continued. He said, and from that time, or the verse continues, and from that time on, Mephibosheth ate regularly at David's table, like one of the king's own sons. Now, I love this. David treats Mephibosheth like his own son and decides, I'm going to be a blessing to him. Well, why? Well, it's because Mephibosheth's father, Jonathan, had been a blessing to David, and David never forgot. That's how blessings are supposed to work. We are blessed to be a blessing. God forgives us. And as we grow in our understanding and knowledge of what that means, we start to forgive others. God is patient with us. And as we learn what that means and we grow in our understanding, we start to be more patient with others. God provides for us. And so we hold loosely what we have and we try to help others and be a provision in different ways. But when we lose sight of the blessings in our life, now all of a sudden it's a challenge to bless people. Right? When I have a hard time forgiving, it's because I just lose sight of all the people who've forgiven me. When I have a hard time being generous, it's just because I have a hard time I'm remembering how people have been generous to me. Years ago, Rennie and I became aware of someone who was in a very tough position financially. And they didn't even have a car, and yet they had kids. And so Rennie and I we talked about it, and we decided we were going to give them a car. That's what we did. It wasn't a brand new car, but it's a car that ran perfectly fine. And I just got to tell you, that was not a difficult thing for me to do. It wasn't a difficult thing for Rennie to do. And the reason why is because years earlier, when Rennie and I had been in a tough financial spot, someone gave us a car. And I never forgot that blessing. 4,000 years ago, God chooses a man named Abraham to be the father of a family that would eventually grow into and become the nation of Israel. And God said to Abraham, he says, I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I'm going to bless you and make you famous. Not so you can consume everything on yourself, not so you can have all the attention all the time, but it's so you can be a blessing to others. Whatever blessings you have in your life, they're not just for you. Your education, not just for you. The job that you have, not just for you. The talents you've been given. The free time that you have. The apartment that you live in. The health that you have. The opportunities that come your way. The vehicles you drive. They are not just for you. They're to be shared. They're to be used as a blessing to others. Now, here's the deal. I think for a lot of us, including myself, it's very, very easy to become blinded to the blessings in our life. It's so hard for us to recognize how many blessings we have, and that's because blessings get filtered through something called awareness. When I become aware of what you have and I don't have it, I don't feel very blessed. When I get onto Amazon and I see all the different options available, I don't feel very blessed. When I go to a mall, when I go to Home Depot and Lowe's, I don't feel very blessed. But when I become aware of what I have that others don't, now I start to feel more blessed. When I go on a mission trip to a developing country, when I'm hanging with someone who's going through a tough financial spot and they're in a season of difficulty, all of a sudden I feel more and more blessed. And so my prayer for all of us is that God would just open our eyes and that we would continually grow in awareness of the many, many blessings in our life. And my prayer for all of us is that we can embrace the reality that God has blessed us in incredible ways and that the blessings in our life are intended to be shared to help others flourish. It's easy to forget this. I got to tell you, most of the time when I pray about God's blessing on my life and my family, it's about, oh man, I just want to be more comfortable. I want the stress gone. I want life to be easier. Right? Because I just think, man, the more I have, the more confidence I'm going to have in security and contentment and happiness. But the irony is that the more blessings I've seemed to have in my life, the more accomplishments and achievements and things that I've accumulated, often what's happened is the more fearful I become because now I don't want to lose those things. And I got to protect them. And I'm telling you, this is my story. The only way that I've ever been able personally to manage this fear and insecurity around losing stuff and losing, some of the things that I've acquired is by regularly identifying the blessings in my life and holding them loosely and sharing them with others. And so I just want to pause for a moment, and I want to talk about what blessings look like from a financial perspective. It's so fascinating to me because we live in the United States, which study after study after study has revealed that people living in the United States are among the wealthiest people on the planet. And yet, none of us feel wealthy. None of us. Now, being some of the wealthiest people on the planet doesn't mean life's easy. It doesn't mean that there aren't bills that go unpaid. It doesn't mean that things aren't stressful. It just means that there are more resources and opportunities available to us in this country than in almost every other country that exists. We are incredibly blessed. And we don't have to feel guilty about it. We don't have to feel bad about it. We just have to realize that the blessings in our life are not just for us. they're intended to be shared with others so that other people's lives can flourish as well. And the reason that this is such a challenge for so many people is we have this fear that gets into our heart and emotions, and fear that gets into our different ways of thinking. And our fear is like, man, if I live open-handed, if I start to be someone who gives generously, well, what if? What if the economy changes? And what if I can't pay my bills? And what if I run out of money? And what if? Well, King Solomon of Israel, he addresses this fear. He addresses this issue from his own observations. And here's what King Solomon writes. He says, one person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. Now, if you've never been a person who's made it a practice in your life to live generously and live open-handed and make giving a habit in your life, I'm going to tell you, what Solomon writes here doesn't make any sense. What makes sense is when I live open-handed, I lose everything. When I live open-handed, I'm never ready for retirement. When I live open-handed, things start to fall apart in my life. But Solomon says that's not true. And what Solomon writes is like an autostereogram. Right? An autostereogram is an image that looks very abstract. Right? It looks like nonsense. But if you look at it long enough, you stare at it long enough, you realize that there is a 3D image in there that pops out at you. So this is a shark. Right? And if you stare hard enough or long enough, you're going to see the shark. Now, some people can do this in moments. They look at it, it's like, boom, their eyes, their mind's trained on this stuff, and they see it. And the reason I know it's a shark is I personally saw it. But there are other people who are convinced you are on drugs. There's no way that there is a 3D image in all of it. But once you see it, you're convinced that it's there. Well, this is true in the area of generosity. There are people who I know who have lived generously, they've lived open-handed, and they'll say it's not a hoax. What Solomon writes is absolutely true. The more generous I am, it just seems like, man, there's more to be generous with. Because I see blessings differently. I look at the things in my life differently. Yet those who hold so tightly, they never feel like there's anything out there. The blessing that God provides in our life, so many different ways, so many different blessings, they're intended to be shared with others so that other people's lives can flourish as well. Throughout church history, the church of Jesus Christ has always led the way financially in culture. One historian writes this about the early days of the church. They say, unlike members of other clubs and societies that collected dues and fees to pay for feasts, members of the Christian family contributed money voluntarily to a common fund to support orphans abandoned in the streets and garbage dumps. Christian groups brought food, medicine, and companionship to prisoners forced to work in mines, banished to prison islands, or held in jail. Christians even bought coffins and dug graves to bury the poor and to bury criminals whose corpses would have otherwise lain unburied beyond the city gates. Such generosity, which ordinarily could only be expected from one's own family, attracted crowds of newcomers to Christian groups despite the risk. It attracted crowds of newcomers. That is an understatement. Because in the first few centuries of the church grew by 40% every single decade for 300 years. Fastest growing movement in the history of the world. And the reason it grew so fast had nothing to do with the fact people were blessed. There's lots and lots of people who are blessed. It had everything to do with the fact that from the earliest days of the church, followers of Jesus recognized their blessings and decided we're going to share these with others. They understood they were blessed to be a blessing. And the good news is, 2,000 years later, the Church of Jesus Christ is still leading the way. In the United States, every single year, $450 billion plus is given to charity. 33% of that is given to the local church. Think of all the different types of charities out there. All the different ways you can give. 33% of what's given goes to fund the ministries of the local church. So you can be as cynical as you want. You can be as critical as you want. You can laugh and mock the excess that maybe you've seen from time to time in different environments, religious environments that are the outliers. But I'm telling you, the Church of Jesus Christ has led the way for a couple thousand years in caring for others, in serving others, in showing compassion to others. And we have been able to do way more collectively as a church than anyone could ever do individually. And in every generation, the followers of Jesus have come together and they just made it a practice in their life. Say, hey, we're going to be people who give faithfully and regularly. They've experienced something that the Apostle Paul wrote about when he was talking to people who gave generously. Here's what Paul writes. He says, to people who give generously, he says, you will be enriched in every way so that you can always be generous. So don't worry about losing all. Don't worry, well, what if the economy changes? What if this? He says, man, you're going to be enriched in every way. You'll always be able to do this. And he says, and then when we take your gifts to those who need them, they will thank God. And I love that verse because I've seen it played out over and over and over at Great Lakes. Every single year for the past 13 years, this church has grown in generosity. And so today's talk is just a way of saying thank you. Thank you for being a blessing. Thank you for living open-handed. Thank you for living this out. And I want you to know that when we take our collective gifts to those who need them, they thank God. This past week, I had the opportunity to swing by Shalom Center in Kenosha. If you're not familiar with the Shalom Center, they serve the community by providing emergency food and shelter and support in ways that just hit the immediate need that people have. They serve others in an incredible way. They make sure that they're treated with dignity. Well, I swung by the Shalom Center with some crumble cookies and a card thanking them for the work that they do. Now, the context is this. Prior to our 2021 Christmas offering, I committed to the Shalom Center that Great Lakes Church would make sure that we gave them $2,500 in 2022. I said, we may be able to do more based on a Christmas offering. I said, but I just want you to know we are committed to doing $2,500 and helping with needs in the soup kitchen and in the pantry that you have. And so I stopped by, I gave them these cookies, I gave them a card, and inside that card was a gift of $8,000 because of your generosity and my generosity, and collectively, what we're able to do. And I'm telling you, they were grateful. The director kept saying, wow, 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 wow. And I'm telling you, I was so proud. And it was so meaningful to be able to bless a ministry like this. But something happened when I was there at the Shalom Center that moved me in a big way. So I'm walking in, and there is a lady with her daughter and one of her daughter's friends who are about to leave. And I didn't recognize her at first because she had a mask, and she started making fun of me. You don't recognize me, do you? And then I recognized her voice, and it's a lady who's been part of our church for over a decade, her and her family. And the reason they were there is because her daughter, on her own, had put together 100 bags filled with useful items for people in a shelter. And she called these bags blessing bags. And so two of the people from Shalom Center are sitting there with this lady's daughter and one of her friends, and they're dropping off the bag. And what I love so much is that this young girl didn't create these bags at some event at Great Lakes Church. She did it on her own. And I know she primarily learned this heart from her parents because I know them. But I also know it's because the influence of our church, we keep this stuff in front of our kids and our students. It's core to who we are. We are blessed to be a blessing. And now I want you to think about something that pushes this a little bit further. I want you to think about this. It's actually a blessing to be able to bless others. It's a blessing that our church is in a position to help others. And the only reason that we're able to do what we do is because of the faithful giving of the people who make up this church. People link arms and say, man, we care about doing ministry here, near, and far. And so whether you realize it or not, it is a privilege to give. The Apostle Paul, he reminded some of the early leaders of the church about this. Here's what he said to them. He said, you should remember the words of the Lord Jesus. It is more blessed to give than to receive. Now, for those of you who think, well, it's easy for the pastor to say. For those of you who think, yep, this is the thing that turns me off about churches, this is what makes me cynical. Always seems like churches are talking about money. I'll just tell you, we don't talk about money enough. 2 times a year, I'll do a talk where I just candidly talk about finances, and we don't talk about money enough. But I want you to hear something that was written by a guy named Don Lynn Scott. This is a story of his life and some things that unfolded. He says, on July 23rd, 1970, my wife Connie gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. For 3 years, we had tried unsuccessfully to start a family, and so our joy was great with the arrival of what was to be our one and only biological child. We later adopted a daughter. But Lance was born before it became acceptable for a father to be present in the delivery room, a fact for which I have always been grateful. Well, then Don starts to write about all the hospital bills he had to pay for his son. He says, those checks turned out to be only the first of hundreds, maybe thousands I would write on Lance's behalf. He said, children are expensive. This is a picture of Lance. He said, there's formula and food to buy, doctor visits and vaccinations, diapers, toys, clothing. He said, just about the time we built a great wardrobe for this kid, he'd grow, forcing us to start all over again. At his age and size, as his age and size increased, so did his expenses. Soon it became basketball gloves, Nike shoes, and uniforms. There were glasses for his eyes, braces for his teeth. And then disaster struck. Lance became a teenager. He talks about cars and dates and name brand clothes. He says then he graduates and wants to be an architect. And he says it just seemed like he was going to be in school until he's 42. Expenses soared, tuition, books, drawing tools led the long list of essential expenditures. He said, but of course, just like parents everywhere, we were happy to be able to help him, and we did all we could to support his growth and his dreams. And then one day, Lance died. Halloween day, 1991, we buried 21-year-old Lance in our church's country cemetery. He said that afternoon, we walked away from his grave, and since that day, we have never spent another nickel on Lance. That's how I learned it. He said, death is cheap. Death can be sustained without expense. It's living that is costly. It's growth that's expensive. Our dreams, our visions, and our hopes require sacrifice. Death doesn't. And Don talks about how he used to struggle giving in a church environment. He says, not anymore. He says, a living, growing, thriving organization is always going to require the continual, consistent, and conscientious financial support of the people who believe in its mission. And so I just want you to hear this. It is a blessing for our church to be able to give a check to the Shalom Center because it means that there is an organization that exists in our community that is caring for those who are often overlooked and neglected. It's a blessing for us to be able to send a check this past week to a church in New Orleans that none of us will ever attend. But Hurricane Ida took a big toll on their finances in 2021, and we wanted to help. And by us sending a check, it means that they are alive and they're doing ministry and they're caring for others in a part of the country we will not be able to impact on our own. It's a blessing for us to be able to invest $10,000 last month and send a check to Hosea's Heart because it means there's an organization in Eswatini, Africa that's alive and bringing hope and future to young women, many of them impacted by sexual abuse. And they're being served in their physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. It was a blessing to give thousands of dollars in brand new toys to Kingdom Builders last November because it means that there's a ministry that's alive and exists in the Racine community, and it's serving the needs of kids who would never walk through the doors of our campuses. It's a blessing to have given millions and millions of dollars to ministries here, near, and far. And there's a map that just begins to have little dots that kind of represent areas that were impacted, and I'm telling you, it doesn't show the story of things that have unfolded in 13 years. It doesn't talk about the communities that now have clean water. It doesn't talk about the animals that have been given as a sustainable form of income. It doesn't talk about the churches that have been started. It doesn't talk about children that have been fed, young men and women who've been served. It doesn't talk about all the people at our Kenosha and Racine campuses and those online who've been impacted. And so I just hope you see, and I hope you embrace the reality that God has blessed us to be a blessing, and it is a blessing to give. And for the thousands of families who have given to the ministries of Great Lakes Church over the last 13 years, I hope everyone can say it is a blessing because it means that there is a ministry in Southeast Wisconsin and Northern Illinois that is alive and that is sharing resources and that is blessing communities and that's helping put an anchor in the hearts of children and students so they don't drift too far in life. And they're bringing adults together and they're being available for helping people whose marriages are struggling or people who are just lost in different areas of their life and looking for a little bit of direction. 3,000 years ago, King David of Israel, he calls on the people of Israel to give generously to the building of a temple. And people responded. They brought so much stuff that he stood up and said, enough is enough. We can't take it anymore. And as he stood in front of these people and looking at this gifts, he breaks out into a prayer of gratitude. And in the middle of that prayer, he prays, "Oh, our God, we thank you and we praise your glorious name." And then he asks, "But who am I? And who are my people that we could give anything to you? Everything we have has come from you, and we give you only what you first gave us." Those of you who give generously week after week, month after month, year after year, thank you. And if it's not your practice, I invite you to make it a practice in your life. to give regularly. You say, well, I'm not a follower of Jesus. Don't give to the church, but give to something. Do not let your life be about you. If you are part of the church, I invite you in this season to begin to say, you know what? I'm going to make this a priority. I invite you to do it. Rennie and I have done our whole marriage. We just have a simple principle. Give, save, live on the rest. And for us, it's we give 10%, we save 10%, and we live on the rest. Now that's overwhelming. Give $1, save $1, live on the rest. This is between you and God. Give 1%, save 1%, live on the rest, but start somewhere. And I'm promising you, mark my words, if you live this way long enough, your eyes will become more and more and more open to the blessings of God in front of you. And you will realize how good God has been in multiple areas of your life. Let's go ahead and stand. I'm going to close in prayer and just pray a simple blessing over us. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the incredible amount of blessings in our life. I pray open our eyes to see them in unique ways. Open our eyes to recognize them. And now I speak over you. God is with you and he is for you. May he bless you in every area of your life. May you see the blessings in your life. May he bless you and protect you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you his peace. In Jesus' name, amen.